Thank you for joining me today. And firstly, I would like to start with a very broad topic. So we've seen lots of companies here with novel ideas and novel suggestions and innovation that they're promoting to us. These three men are going to talk to us a little bit more about innovation and about science in space of neural and psychiatric diseases. So first, my question is it all about prevention? Is it all about fixing problems once they start? Or are we actually going towards early diagnosis? Are we heading towards treatment? I will pass it on first to Baptiste to tell us a little bit more about the fantastic work that you do at Agent T.
So we are developing at AGNT the first blood diagnosis of Alzheimer's to detect the patient at least 20 years before the first symptoms. During the last 30 years, big pharmaceutical companies have tried to find a cure to the disease, but all of the clinical trials have failed. One of the main reasons is that we diagnose patients at least 10 to 15 years too late, when the brain is too damaged and we cannot slow down or stop the progression of the disease. And it's very difficult and even almost impossible to develop a diagnosis from human blood samples, because what we have found at AGNT is that the biomarkers, so biomarkers is a small constituent of your blood that we're going to assay to find if you are sick or not, evolve differently according to the stage of progression. For example, in the silent phase of Alzheimer's, you've got 3 stages of progression. The first one, you're going to have specific biomarkers. For the second one also, and for the third one also. And from human blood samples, you cannot do that. So you need to use a simplified model, an animal model, in fact, and that's why my associate, Dr. Jérôme Brando, has developed during more than 10 years. So we have got the first animal model of the silent phase of Alzheimer's. And with these animal models, we have defined specific biomarkers for each stage of the disease. And thanks to machine learning approaches, we have defined an algorithm that detects if the animal is suffering from Alzheimer's and at which stage of the disease is. So this certification is disruptive because that's the first test that's going to be able to say at which stage of the disease you are and to treat you differently. And so next year, we're going to validate this diagnosis on human blood samples by retrospective studies, so blood samples that has been taken 10 years before the current diagnosis. And that will be the next step for a company.
Perfect. That's very interesting because that's about dealing with the disease before it even started and about knowing that you may be very likely to develop this disease. So it's about early detection and prevention, and I have a lot of questions about that. But maybe before we go into depth and into research that you are developing in that space, I would like to pass it on to Alan, who's gonna now wear a slightly different hat. He's gonna tell us a little bit more about his novel invention, which allows us to treat autism.
Yeah, thank you, Dominika. So, change of hat. Yeah, I mean, your opening question was around the purpose of diagnosis and otherwise, and I think my view is always that healthcare should always be about returning to optimum health and improving quality of life. There are many examples of symptomatic management. Not to say that's a bad thing, but that can't be the goal. The goal has to be the return to full and formal health. The areas that we're researching around at the moment are in neurological conditions, so all to do with brain activity and such. And one of the critical areas of study is autism spectrum disorder, ASD as it's known. It's highly prevalent. It's pretty hard to meet anybody that doesn't know someone that's affected in some way by autism in some sense, and has a massive impact on social life and otherwise. So in a different sense, what we're looking at right now is the treatment, not necessarily in AI, although potentially with biomarkers and other things might give early indications, but we're looking at ultimately an evolution of hyperbaric medicine, which has been around for a number of years in terms of the application of oxygen, but processing it in a very different way and in a very different environment at specific doses. And the results that we're seeing right now are transformative on autistic patients, genuinely taking people that have been autistic with very significant autistic scores and bringing them towards, I think, what we would all claim to be close to close to normality. I think looking at the scoring system for autism, probably none of us are in the normal category, but bringing people in so they can be functional and have a high quality of life sustainably and permanently. And so there's research to go in there now with angiogenesis and biomarkers and other things. But that's what we're working through just now. It's quite different.
Brilliant. We will come back to this research in a moment. It sounds fascinating that one day, hopefully, we'll be able to treat autism instead of just dealing with symptoms. But I want to pass it on to Sebastian, who represents a faculty of pharmacy. My question to you is about how we're dealing with these diseases now. Because the story we hear here is very promising, but we know that for now, pharmacology may bring some answers and may bring some current solutions.
I'm so sorry to be a devil's advocate here. I'm sorry to be such a scientist, but we are not doing very well, and we're not doing a good job here, unfortunately. So we don't have good drugs there. I mean, there are drugs which help to prevent some symptoms, but in general, we are not able to treat neither of those diseases which you mentioned. Having said that, we are obviously working on that, and probably the biggest challenge is at the level of the translation. So we are very good in killing mice, we are very good in killing rats. We do understand the mechanisms, we do understand a little bit about the brain, but the problem is, and we've got a little bit of knowledge about the in vitro systems, but the problem is how to translate this data to the human stage, or to the human situation, to the clinical trials level. That's probably the most challenging thing. So this is something what we should focus on, in my opinion, at least. Having said that, the drugs are not there yet, but hopefully they will be there at some stage.
Mm-hmm. So we do finish your answer on a slightly upbeat note. That brings me to the next question, which is about research that surrounds those projects. And all of you have mentioned that there is some rigorous science that it's needed, and some science that we need to introduce and we need to conduct in order to bring us to the goal, in order to make sure that the solutions we are coming up with are actually the right solutions for the problem. So I pass it on again to you, Alan, to elaborate a little bit more on the research that you've mentioned just before.
I mean, everything needs to be shrouded or supported by good research. So there's no doubt about that. You need gold standard medical trials, all the things that give people absolute confidence in the therapy or the treatment or the pharmacology that's being applied. For that, there's no doubt. You know, from our perspective, sometimes when you're working on something like autism spectrum disorder, the very diagnosis itself is subjective, which actually can make it quite hard. It's actually a diagnosis often driven by the carers or the parents of the autistic subject. So that can make some of the research pretty tough. But where we're taking it clinically is really we're focusing on something called angiogenesis, which is all to do with the vascular development really within the brain. The brain is very sensitive to oxygen content, oxygen delivery. And what we've seen in a range of studies is that the vascular development seems to be incomplete and unstable in those affected by autism, and the application of a specific type of therapy appears to be allowing that process to complete, which is why it becomes permanent and sustained in terms of its outcome. So certainly from our perspective right now, there's quite a lot of research we've still yet to do to go and really push forward on the angiogenesis side of things. It's only been in research in medicine for maybe 20, 25 years, which seems like a long time, but often in medical research is not so long.
It's a short time. That's true. So as far as I understand, the study you've mentioned was a fairly small-scale study.
Yes.
But now we're talking about bringing this treatment to large randomized controlled trials? Is that the plan?
So we're in the process of that at the moment. So we're working on both planning and actually talking to a couple of different research councils and agencies at the moment in relation to support to get the investment to go and drive the trials. Trials take some time, investment and money, as we all know. So we're doing that, and in parallel we're looking at the productization, because we believe the delivery of the capability needs to be in the home, because that's where the subjects are. There's a lot of press at the moment in the UK on mental health. It's Mental Health Week in the UK, and a lot of press around people with certain types of neurological disorders being treated at home for a period of time, then taken away and being stuck into treatment centres and other environments and things. And we believe if it can be done in the home, in the care and the care of the family, in the family environment, that's better for the subject, for the patient.
Absolutely, and it's bringing right treatment to the right patient.
Yeah.
I pass it on to you, Baptiste. So you've mentioned animal models. How applicable are these animal models to doing science on humans now? Do you have any plans? Are you already running this research that you've mentioned before? Or is it something that you would like to do in the future?
Yeah, we have finished the preclinical phase. So what we have is a diagnosis that has been validated or an animal model. I have to mention that this animal model is disruptive because it's not the same technologies that we have used to design animal model, Alzheimer's animal models during the last 30 years. Before, it was transgenic animals, which have a lot of drawbacks. And our animal model is based on gene transfer. So we inject viruses into the brain, and that starts some neurons to act like A-beta 42 factories. And then we observe hyperphosphorylation of the tau protein, endogenous tau, and at the end, plaques and tangles like aggregate. So it's a very closer than that we have. It's closer to humans than the latest models. And now we are going to try to validate this on humans. So what we're going to do is to use blood samples that have already been taken. So we don't have to wait, for example, 10 years to come fix the diagnosis because the person has been, the sample has been taken before the current diagnosis. So we're working with different institutes, very well-known institutes, and that's a partnership that is very important for us because that will validate that we are going to good science, and I think that's it.
And it would be brilliant to have a biomarker to be able to have a blood test that tell me that I can develop Alzheimer's within the next 5 or 10 years. But are you also planning to do some qualitative research around it and to deeply understand what would it mean to a patient to actually have this awareness that in 5, 10 years from now they may have an onset of symptoms?
Yeah, at first we are going to propose this test only to people that want to get involved in clinical trials. So we're not going to sell it to everyone because right now, of course, there is prevention, and a lot of studies are showing that prevention could help to decrease the risk of developing the disease, but there is no treatment. So it's going to be to help people to enter clinical trials. So the first target will be a big pharma company.
Thank you for that. And Sebastian, you've mentioned translation, and you've mentioned how important it is that we translate our science and take it forward. So in the context of today's discussion, I would like you to expand a little bit more on that topic and to tell us a little bit more, how do you think in polished settings, how well do we translate the innovation that we have in the research to the real world?
So there are two things which you asked about, actually. The first one is a scientific translation, and the other one is a innovation translation. So if you're okay with that, I will focus on the first one.
Absolutely.
That's the area where I feel confident. So as for the scientific translation, we're doing pretty good job, actually, at the moment, better and better, and even going farther to something what is actually accepted by the regulators everywhere around the world. So for that, we're using mathematical models, the mechanistic mathematical models, which by describing the mechanisms of pathology, of the kinetics of the drugs, take the in vitro data, or to some degree also animal data and human data, and translate it further to the human situation. So for example, precision medicine, new drugs, new generic drugs are taken from the preclinical and development stage straight to the clinical trials and to the patients with use of these models. So we're really making a translation from the early stage to late stage, sometimes bypassing the clinical trials, or at least some of the clinical trials. So that's the area where I see real impact and where I believe the translation can be defined and seen. However, having said that, apart from that, I think the education will be important as well. I agree with both of you with something what Baptiste said. We do need to teach patients and families what to do in a situation when the disease was diagnosed, what to do when the drug has to be introduced. So education is something what we cannot leave behind, that's for sure.
Thank you for that. So to finish off, I have a challenge to all three of you. So I would like you to summarize in 30 seconds, and you have a clock in front of you. What do you think the future holds? What do you think is the future of this space? Dave?
Okay, 15 seconds. So I think, for me, focused around the neurological side of things, I think the reality is just like quantum physics is changing the world of physics, there's a huge amount of neurology, epigenetics, neuroscience, and other things that we don't yet fully understand the true full ramifications of. I think we're going to see significant transformation in there, and stem cell biology, and I think we're going to learn new ways of how we harness actually the body's own healing capabilities with some stimulus and with some stimulation potentially. But I think a lot of that is going to be really unveiling over the next 10 years. Technology will play a big part in helping us understand it.
Thank you. Baptiste?
I think the key to find treatments to some of the neurological disorders that we can observe is to develop earlier diagnosis. That's a fact for Alzheimer's, but that's also a fact for Parkinson's, for example. And that's a field that we're going to target in the next year or two also. So I think that's going to be the key to fight this kind of disease.
Thank you for that. Sebastian, what do you think future holds?
Do you know why I was asked to come here? Because I'm a crazy scientist, so that's the recognition.
We
And
love
unfortunately,
those.
I have to be the most pessimistic right now, so I don't feel as a crazy scientist any longer. It's a terrible feeling, by the way. Anyway, there won't be a breakthrough. I'm sorry about that. There won't be a breakthrough. AI has been on the market for 60 years right now. Omics has been on the market for 30 years, and so forth and so on. We just know that it exists. We know more or less how it works. And there is still no breakthrough. There will be no breakthrough. I believe in a basic science and really step-by-step type of science. So give me the data, bring me the data. I'll give you what is the solution. I will tell you what is the solution.
That's your opinion. However, I do believe that with all of these fantastic ideas we've heard today, there is still a high chance that there is a breakthrough coming
I hope I'm wrong.
to us soon, and hopefully coming from our innovation here. So, on a very different note, what I do on a daily basis is behavioral science and behavioral medicine. And there's this new thing that we talk about, which is sitting. And sitting is thought to be a new smoking. So now I would like to encourage you all to interrupt your sitting and stand up for a little bit, because it's good for your health and it's good for your body. So if I could ask you to just stand up for a benefit of your health. And give a big round of applause to my speakers for their time today. Thank you.